Hello, and welcome to The Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. I'm Bela.and.mike.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike. Today's guest on the podcast is Gary Frey. Gary has served as president of 4 successful companies, including bizjournals.com, which is a business news portal which he helped transform from a 3-person organization to a $100 million a year business. He also has done some turnarounds and has held some executive positions at Fortune 100 companies. Now, Gary leads the business growth and coaching development efforts for a regional CPA firm that he serves for privately held businesses and their owners.
Bela, this sounds like a really interesting guest. I took a peek at Gary's bio, and what a cool and diverse background. I mean, I'm totally fascinated by anybody who is a journalist, an entrepreneur, and then worked for a CPA firm. And I don't know too many people that kind of fit that specific combination of experiences.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to hear what you two talked about. Let's get right to the interview.
Sounds good, Mike. Hey, Gary, how are you?
I'm good. Good morning to you. How are you? And it's Bela, right?
It's Bela.
Bela. All right, cool.
Yeah,
Bela.
that's right. Thanks for asking. Your last name is Frey?
Frey. It looks
Frey.
like Frey. It sounds like Frey.
All right. Excellent. Hey, welcome to the podcast. It's nice to have you as a guest today. So, Gary, tell me a little bit about yourself and sort of what you do.
Well, I help run a CPA firm, and I'm not a CPA. I've run 4 companies and done a couple turnarounds, and I don't really fit anywhere. But I was brought in to bring my coaching practice in because they had an outside coach as well.
Yeah.
And they were doing some coaching, and I was sending friends of mine to them because they're out of the 80 of us, 12 of us have started, run, or turned around companies using our own money. So that's highly unusual in the CPA world. And so we love helping businesses grow. That's what we love doing more than anything. If they changed the tax code tomorrow, we would still be in business.
Yeah.
And so I'm having way too much fun. And it's funny because I saw that you do this with Mike a lot of times.
Yes,
right?
That's correct. Yep. Yeah. So
yeah,
I typically do the recordings, and then Mike and I get together and do a little post-recording roll about the conversation. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Almost 3 years ago, we started the Anything But Typical podcast, and a young entrepreneur. He was 24 when he sold his first company. He's now whopping 32, I think. He asked me about 3.5 years ago, hey, I would love to do a podcast with you. So we do a co-hosting thing as well. So we've only had 73 episodes. We just do it every other week.
Yeah.
But it's so much fun having the dynamics of 2, you know?
Yes. And, the wonderful thing about this podcasting is I get to chat with interesting people like you. Otherwise, our paths would never cross.
I love it. Right? Me too.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great benefits. So I saw when I was reading about your background that you ran Biz Journals for a while.
Yeah, I was the first president of bizjournals.com.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about that a little bit from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Cool.
So I don't know if you know Carolyn Jones, but she was the editor at the Albany one, and then she moved to Boston, moved to Boston. Yeah, and so the conversation I wanted to have about that was in Albany, which is sort of Albany, New York, which is sort of where I'm from, and spent the last 25 plus years here. The Albany Business Journal owned the business press.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a big newspaper here, the Times-Union, which is owned by, it's a Hearst newspaper, right? But the Albany Business Review just owned the business press, and it came out once a week, and everybody loved it. And to me, it was always a great example of 2 things. Number one, understanding that the business world, the newspaper business is changing because of the internet.
Yeah.
And number 2, this notion of focusing and being the very best at one thing is often better than being mediocre at a bunch of stuff.
Yes.
So I just wanted to see if you had any comments about that, sort of your experience there and sort of that whole industry.
We have some really fun and amazing stories. And I loved working under Ray Shaw, who was the chairman and CEO. He was an Army guy from Oklahoma originally, but he was the vice chairman, I think, and COO of Dow Jones and Wall Street Journal before he retired early, and then bought all these business journals and stitched them together.
Yeah.
And then he and Cy Newhouse up in New York, Cy came in and helped kind of finance a lot of it, I think. So, but Ray was a really, really smart man of very few words, but holy moly, when he was like, his emails were like haiku, but each word meant a lot.
Yes.
And he would always say, local, 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 local. We're all, and it, I was brought in to build bizjournals.com. And at the time, the publishers were really afraid of this thing.
Yes.
Because anything.com had crazy valuations, and anything that had tangible value had little valuation at that time.
That's right.
And so it was probably one of the more unique opportunities I've had in my wacky career. And I learned a lot. And it's funny because I was just talking with a friend in Thailand. I was actually on his podcast, Bobby the Bear. And he has this bear. He is so funny. He's from Los Angeles originally, but I said, we've been told we should be monetizing this podcast, and I'm open to do that. I just don't want to sell my soul. And I was also told, we need to open it up beyond Charlotte, we started with Charlotte because we love helping stitch and knit together more of these businesses. Because when I left Charlotte in 2002 to the Great White North of Cleveland, Ohio, it was because I didn't want to work in either one of the banks again, and I wasn't an engineer, so I wasn't going to go to Duke Energy. And there was not the robust entrepreneurial ecosystem that we have here now. And I'm frankly tired of being in the shadow of the Research Triangle Park of Raleigh-Durham and also Austin, Texas. I mean, this is a beautiful city that's very well connected, and I just wanted to do more with that. And he goes, Gary, the more that's what you should be doing. Just stick with Charlotte, and then you can do a anything but typical edition in Charleston or wherever.
Sure.
And I said,
sure.
How did I miss this? Ray Shaw just pounded this into my head. And so, but a friend of mine, he was a coaching client. He said, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar.
That's right.
That's why we need somebody outside the jar to help us read the label.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent point. That's a great saying. It's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. So Charlotte is wonderful. So I have a little experience down there. My parents, before they passed away, lived in Concord, which is just outside of Charlotte. Yeah. And so we used to go down there all the time. They were down there about 35 years or so. My dad moved down there when IBM opened up their first facility down there.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a wonderful place. And I'll tell you a funny story. My wife and I were sort of talking about maybe moving south from upstate New York, where the winters are long and hard.
Yes,
and,
they are.
And, sort of North Carolina, Charlotte area was one of the places higher on our list. Great quality of life. Just really, July and August are kind of hot, but the rest of the year is beautiful.
That's right. That's right.
And then we have two sons, and one of our sons lives close to us here, and they had their first child.
Oh man.
Yeah. And my wife said, my wife says to me, dear, you can live wherever you want, but I'm not moving. So
yeah, we'll endure the winters and the gray skies, right?
That's right. That's right. So as you do your business coaching and working with companies, when you find a company that's sort of, this is why I take it back to the newspaper, that's in an industry that's rapidly changing, and they have to do a pivot.
Yeah.
Because it's clear that the current thing that's paying the bills is going to go away at some point in time.
Yeah.
How do you help the leadership team sort of embrace that and try to think it through?
That's interesting. They say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But you can salt the oats sometimes, and even if you salt the oats, it still won't drink. So, it really starts with the top. It starts at the CEO, and if the CEO doesn't see it, doesn't get it, you're pushing a wet string up a hill.
Yeah.
I mean, I have yet to see when that actually works. Now, however, when the CEO sees it, and typically if it's good CEO, they have a good management team around them and they empower their people. Then what they do, what I've seen work really, really well, is when they push it down to the front line and they ask, because even when the CEO walks among the troops, and that's really, really important to have their finger on the pulse of what's going on, the front line knows it. They are the canary in the coal mine. They sense it. Now, they may not have the answer.
Yeah.
But they can validate, hey, this is what we need to do. It's funny, when we went into lockdown, the 13th of March was the last day in the office, 2020. And that's busy season in the tax world. I mean, it's just like all hell's breaking loose. Well, then the world, all hell's breaking loose. And it was the second day of lockdown the next week. And our founder, who's, he's 49, I think now. But he said, Gary, we need to do a webinar twice a week. And I said, are you kidding me? Like, we are just burning the candle at both ends, and you want us to do a webinar? I'm like, dude, are you crazy? And he said, Gary, I'm answering the same question 15 times a day.
Yeah.
This would actually really help me. And I know it will help people, because we were fielding calls all the time. I mean, huge dental practices. We've got one that's got 22 dental practices rolled up into it, and we do everything for them, all their bookkeeping, everything. And, that's a lot of freaking overhead that is now dead in the water. And he said, we got people that are just, NASCAR. We've got a lot tied into NASCAR. They weren't running tracks, So what do we do? Well, what was interesting about that, we had pivoted already into technology, and we had some remote flexibility because that was what our people were asking. Now, we have a really strong culture, so you can't go 100% remote and maintain that. We haven't found that way to do that. But so we had that technology in place. Now, all of a sudden, we had to embrace Zoom pretty quickly and readily. But we did. And what was really amazing is within a month, I had a call from an artificial intelligence entrepreneur. I mean, it's crazy. He was doing 10 million in his second year top line with like 60+% margins. And he just has taken an offer for $100 million. That's 3 years later. It's just unbelievable. But he calls me, doesn't know, I don't know him from Adam. And he sent me a note on LinkedIn at about 11:15 at night. And he said, I've been following you on LinkedIn. I've been listening to your webinars. I wish every CPA thought like you guys, because we were just like, matter of fact, Jack, we're putting ourselves out there and risking, but we were not going to settle for the sanitized talking points coming down from the gobbledygook government that made no sense.
Yeah.
So we just said, yeah, we're going to put ourselves at risk, but we're going to do what we know to do, is just speak English, because we're in the same stinking boat that everybody else is.
Yeah.
So at that moment, I went back to the rest of the members of our leadership team, and I said, hey guys, I know we've always said because we have a very high touch service, an hour outside of Charlotte or any of our other 2 offices in Myrtle Beach or in Hendersonville, North Carolina, we aren't taking any clients outside of those areas. And I said, this guy's in Florida. I've recorded it, and with his permission, he seems like a good guy. And we're really picky kind of about who we bring on too, because we don't lose our people, because we're pretty careful about curating who our clientele are.
Yeah.
And so I said, what do you think? And they said, if he's open to us not coming down to Florida. And I said, yeah. So sure enough, well, then that, and then Los Angeles, we've taken on some clients from Los Angeles. We actually had one from Hawaii that was interested, and I'm like, 6-hour time difference. No, it won't be good.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
We said no on that, but that was a pivot for us. And we just blew up exponentially because of that, even, and just really trying to serve our people. That's really, it was not a marketing thing. It wasn't it was a Happy Gilmore accident, quite frankly.
Yeah. So that's a great example of sort of a pivot where you have a really strong forcing function, right? It's COVID, right? And it's like, and it's clear, you got to do something, otherwise you're gone.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of one category. The other category is the slow creeping thing that's coming along.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And so there's no forcing function. It's like, yeah, sales are down 5% over last year, but we're still doing okay. And everyone's entrenched and very happy doing what they're doing. And whenever you make a change, it's more work for somebody, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's new technology or it's new customers or it's new anything, it's more work than the status quo, at least initially.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of resistance. So, how do you approach something like that?
Yeah, it's funny. I think complacency is a really dangerous thing, because it's really easy to get comfortable. I don't want to rock the boat. Yeah, it looks like storm's on the horizon, but it'll probably blow away. Those kind of things, right? And again,
we've seen this before.
I've seen it so many times, it's not even funny, but I still go back to it. It's a lot of weight and responsibility that's on the shoulder of that entrepreneur or the founder or the CEO. Management sets the tone. And what I've seen is, if the coaching clients that we've accepted and coached and really had a ton of fun with have this curiosity. They have this insatiable curiosity. And a lot of times they suffer from shiny object syndrome. So that's the place where you got to kind of throttle them back a little bit, because they wear out their people. But and I've got a coaching client that we saw happen with this 4 years ago. He had turned down $3.5 million for his company. He was really burned out, but he had never, he barely finished high school and got fired from the Hardys, literally. But he's very bright, very bright. And he loves inventing stuff. Well, he asked if I would coach him and his team. And I said, as long as you're considering selling, no. So a few months later, he goes, I just turned down another offer. I can't leave my team. Okay. So we got him together. We did a 2-day offsite with him and his management team. And we started horse trading. One of the things that I do is I'll horse trade responsibilities with that team, and getting right people in the right seats. And he had a lot of the right people in the right seats, but not all of them were doing the stuff that they love to do. They were doing stuff that they needed to do. Well, that was a massive shift, but then all of a sudden it allowed creativity for him to do what he loved to do, which was invent stuff. And as the team got stabilized and they had concentration risk with one of their clients, they were actually losing $35 on every invoice to this massive client of theirs. They didn't know it. So they got that stabilized and they did some price increases that were necessary, et cetera. Well, then the guy has the freedom. He went from literally hating to go into work every day. And about 5 months later, he said, Gary, I'm so happy. And I said, you seem like you're doing really well. But his wife was dealing with some pretty serious medical conditions, and they had adopted a special needs child that was really having a lot of issues. So it wasn't like life was beautiful and perfect, but he said, I can't wait to go to work every day. Well, when that starts happening, he was back in his happy place, and he could start seeing trends. He couldn't see the trends before because he was just sucked into the vortex of the doom loop, it seemed like. Well, that company, they just sold for 17 million. They tripled their top line and quadrupled their bottom line. And I think he's actually, regretting selling it because they sold it at the top of the market, and he's not unhappy for, the 8 figures that he got from this thing, but I think he really, really misses his team.
Yeah.
But during that period of time, they pivoted and they did a number of things, and they actually launched another kind of a company that was tangential to them. It was similar, but way different, as just another way to diversify. And so I just thought that was brilliant. But if the CEO can't be free, I think then everybody else kind of follows the leader.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Great way of saying it. So let me ask you another question. Earlier, you mentioned a little bit about customers and being careful about the customers that you pick.
Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit, right? Because oftentimes, particularly young companies are so eager for customers that they will, I'll use the word, take anybody.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And it's really difficult sometimes to fire a customer. So talk through that a little bit.
It's painful, and it doesn't do anybody any good. Yeah, and I've seen this and learned it the hard way as well, because my first company, I was brought in to turn around when I was 28, and it was kind of the same thing. Like, holy moly, we just needed to keep the lights on. But what I found over time is, and I use the Venturi tube as an analogy. So a Venturi tube narrows in the center, and then it widens at both openings. Well, what happens is things accelerate through that Venturi tube where it gets narrow. And I've found it over and over and over and over again that you accelerate when you narrow your focus. And so we have a very tight focus on who we will take and who we won't. And we don't work with privately held individuals. And now I say that we acquired through some early acquisitions a long time ago, and we aren't growing by acquisitions anymore. But we have some CEOs of very large publicly traded companies that we do work with, but we aren't taking any new clients like that. It doesn't matter how much money they have or how much money they'll throw at us. We focus on privately held businesses and their owners. That's it. Why? Well, because we love helping companies grow. And so I put together a thing that I call the red flags, green lights criteria. So we're looking, I'm primarily the main guy for a lot of the business development procurement. A few of us that are partners also do that, but we are very emphatic about when we have that initial conversation, we're looking for red flags. So if somebody is super price sensitive, we're not the right group because we're one of the more expensive groups. If they have been switching CPAs frequently, that usually says it's not the CPA firm. It's you, Will Robinson.
Yeah.
And if they are publicly traded, nope. If they are in industries that are, let's just say, less than desirable and have some ethical concerns, nope. I don't care how much money. And let's face it, there are some industries out there that print money that are highly unethical, and it doesn't matter how much you would pay us, we wouldn't take it. So those are kind of the red flags. The green lights are, a lot of times they'll say, I don't know what I'm doing. And I've heard that from people running $100 million companies,
Yeah.
Oh, Gary, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, yes, you do. And certain things, but they don't know our expertise. And that's why they need people and wise counsel around them. So we're looking for those kind of things. And we're looking for high growth. If somebody's just like mailing it in and they're happy, that's great for them, but we can't help them that much.
Yeah.
So we look for the red flags, green lights, and that helps so much. And we encourage our clients to do the same. And it's terrifying because you're like, oh no, I'm limiting my pool. Believe me, the more specialized you are, the more memorable you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I can remember years and years ago, very early on in my career, I met socially, I met an attorney and we got to be great friends. I lived in Hartford, Connecticut at this time. And we were talking about business. I was an entrepreneur. I was starting a business, and he was a lawyer in a firm that he was a partner in, but it wasn't, he wasn't the founding partner or anything.
Sure.
And I remember him saying to me, he goes, my goal is to be the highest priced attorney in Hartford.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Because he knows he wants that value, right? He wants to bring that value. So it's not about price. Right. So the conversation is right. The conversation is not about price. The conversation is about what value you can bring. And so how do you guys kind of have that conversation in your business, right? With customers, right? Because I'm sure sometimes there's sticker shock. They go, oh my gosh. And how do you deal with that?
I have that conversation right up front. And I'll just say, tell me about your business. Tell me about you. What are you looking for? What are you frustrated with? And they always come because there's pain, always.
Yes.
And the pain is always like 98% of the time, I can't get my CPA to return my calls. Like they've been silent and I want proactivity. But if they would just freaking return my calls, the bar is so low in our industry. That's why I like it. I'm not a CPA again. I'm not a CFO. So I just find it fascinating. I'm like, oh, wow, this is happy hunting ground. So I'm listening for that pain. But then I'll say, all right, what do you know about us? And they'll say, oh, I've been to your website or whatever. You look really different. Yeah, like our website is way different. You're not seeing mahogany and brass, and we are anything but stuffy. Now, we're fun, but we work hard, and we love partnering with our clientele. But I'll say, listen, if price is what is your driver, I can tell you right now, we are not that group. And there are bigger firms, and sometimes we're more expensive than those bigger firms, but we do all-inclusive pricing. So we do a deep dive on where you've been last 2 years of your tax returns, financial reports. We'll look at all of those things, and we'll do a couple of weeks of deep dive on that. We'll come back with insights, and then we scope the work, and we charge for. We have quarterly meetings. They are mandated. You can call us at any time you want. Now, if you abuse it, there will be a price for that, but most people don't. But we build that into the price. We make sure that we have a financial review and plan for you. We actually even do a sales review of what's going on, because top line sales, like everybody needs more growth, but we'll do all kinds of analysis, but we are not going to do like what happens in the construction world, which is, you bid the price, but then you make your money on change fees. We don't do that. And so I'll just say, and they may go, well, oh gosh, well, what do you think it's going to be? And I'll say, well, our standard pricing for these things is about this. And if they start gulping, I'm like, hey, you know what? I've got a couple folks that I send work to. And listen, even though I'm helping run part of our company, my commission is 100%. I'm 100% commission. That's how I'm paid. That's what I agreed to early on. So But even so, last year alone, I sent double the amount of clients away to other firms than what we took in. And I don't get paid a dime for those referrals. I don't want a dime for those referrals.
Yeah.
Happy to take care of somebody and make sure that they're in good hands. And, it's kind of like paying it forward. People are grateful for that. But then, then I've had people like, well, but I really, would you take us on? I'm like,
Yes.
well, let's see. Based on what I'm hearing, sounds like it's good. And we're not trying to be hard to get or anything like that. That's just not who we are. But let's see. And if we are the right fit, great. And if not, I will not abandon you and just say no room in the inn. So
yeah, excellent.
That seems to work pretty well.
Yeah. So I think this notion of customer selectivity is one that oftentimes businesses ignore.
Yeah, and I think it gets into that it's really fear. I think at the and this kind of scarcity mentality. Oh gosh, no, the thing is people will remember you treat people well. Do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. And man, maybe just a little bit more and you're all of a sudden a rock star.
Yeah.
The bar is so low.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
So I'm a firm believer that the more you narrow, the better you are. And we saw that at bizjournals.com. Our cost per thousand on advertising, and at that time, yeah, we were subscription based, but bizjournals.com, we were a free entity that supported, and we had to work out, revenue sharing arrangements with the publishers who were really threatened by this thing. But our cost per thousand was way higher than the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Well, why is that? Well, because we had paid subscriptions and our household incomes were higher than Wall Street Journal readers. We could justify doing that. We knew our audience extremely well, and we served them, I think, pretty well. So the narrower you are and the more, but you still have to be good.
Yes. Yeah. So given what we've been talking about here in this notion of focus on the customer, being selective with the customer, you got to have the right kind of employees.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you kind of think about hiring and selecting employees?
Well, this is going to sound funny, but my number one criteria that I look for, and I can tell it in 30 seconds with a candidate. My question internally is, did they come with batteries installed or not? What does that mean? You can tell, do they have fire in the belly? Do they have some electricity? And that doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert and bouncing off the walls, but you can just tell if somebody's lit up and they have drive.
Yeah.
You can't train for that, but that's the number one thing that we look for. The other thing that's interesting in the way that we're doing it, we're trying to embody what Chick-fil-A has done, where they took a commoditized business and they trained and they delivered something very different. And even like turning certain things upside down. Oh, well, we're closed one of the weekend days, closed on Sundays. Well, nobody does that. They do, and they're profitable. But how they pick their people, I think that's really important. There's a consistency there. So that's what we aspire to be in our industry. We are not going to sell. We are not going to franchise it. They don't franchise it either. They are picky about who their operators are. They take them through their training process and then they put them in a market. And it's basically theirs to run. And they share the wealth, but it's still corporate owned, if you will. Well, that's what we're trying to do too. And what we found is from some of the early acquisitions that were before I came into the firm, they experienced the pain and the fallacy of acquisitions of, oh, look at all this duplicitous effort that we can get rid of, and it's just going to be great.
Yeah.
Culture is always overlooked, always overlooked. And that is always the biggest rub in a deal. Culture of between the employees, but then also the clientele. You got some that run roughshod over your people and all that. So we've said, no, we're growing our own. And we found that when we go to places like App State, to UNC Charlotte, to East Carolina, some of these, like, they're not UNC, they're not Duke, but we found that we find a little bit more of a workman and down to earth. Not that UNC people are, hoity-toity or whatever, but the big four are always going to those big firms, and we're like, we're different. We're, we've got a NASCAR hood at the end of one of our halls because we have the NASCAR clients, but it's just different. We wear shorts and t-shirts, most of the time in the summer. So it's just different. And what we found is because we hire them, we train them that way. That's actually what Koch Industries in Wichita, Kansas, where I'm from, that's what they do. They go to Kansas State University and places like that, and they grow their own. They don't bring in outside experts from, that have track records. They want to train them in their ways. And it's funny, we've got a guy that has been with us now 6 years. And I said, Keith, you've been with us twice as long. This was 3 years ago. You've been with us twice as long as your peer group. Average turnover was about 18 months coming into a firm like ours. I said, what? You guys don't leave. Like, what's the deal? And he goes, oh, it's easy. He said, first of all, we're treated like adults. We're given flexibility. We're given responsibility. And he goes, some of us are actually running parts of the company because we run on EOS. We have an outside coach, implementer, that it was a former partner of mine, and he's one of the top in the country in that discipline. And he goes, where else are we going to get that? We have a clear career path. And I thought, wow, that's pretty profound, and we don't have it all together. We're still figuring it out, but we don't lose our people, which is really cool.
Yeah. Excellent. So I want to start wrapping this up here a little bit. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have?
Man, this is your podcast. I don't know. I like your format. I like what you're doing. I've listened to some of your episodes, and I think the conversations are always interesting. So I'm just honored to be part of what you and Mike are doing. I think it's really cool. And I think everybody has a unique story, and everybody's story is worth telling.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for saying that. I really appreciate that. So if people want to connect with you, find out more about what you do, maybe engage with you somehow, how's the best way for them to find you?
LinkedIn is probably the best way, and it's Gary Frey, F-R-E-Y, funky glasses, and that'll be the guy. And then we've got a podcast as well called the Anything But Typical Podcast, featuring the behind the scenes stories of entrepreneurs that have the humility, that are willing to share that, not just the podium finishes. Right. I love that too. I really do. Those are really fun. It's not because it's about us. It's not about us. It's about their stories and helping people realize, if you're in that boat of running a company, you're not alone, because it can feel like the loneliest role in the company. And a lot of people don't in the company think, oh, it must suck to be you. And sometimes it actually does. Yeah. Because it's lonely sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Very well said. Hey, Gary, you've been a wonderful guest. I really appreciated you taking the time out of your busy day to spend some time on our podcast. I wish you the best going forward, and I hope our paths cross again at some time in the future.
Bela, thank you so much. It's been an honor. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Bela, agreed. That was an interesting interview. what a diverse, interesting person with lots of cool opinions. What were your major takeaways?
So I think one of the things that struck me was this notion of focusing on the customer experience and this sort of notion of looking at what the customer sees and does and feels and how they interact with your product or service and having an understanding of that. I think that's sort of a key thing that we need to think about. Another one, I think part of the conversation was this notion about change and how change is often difficult for organizations to undertake, particularly if there's no forcing function, right? And we talked a little bit about COVID, right? COVID was this great forcing function where all of a sudden seeing people on a Zoom call or a Skype call was acceptable, and working from home was acceptable, where, a month prior, you couldn't work from home. And somehow we figured it out. And businesses figured out because we had this forcing function. But the challenge is, though, to have change when there is no forcing function. How do you do that? And I've always been sort of fascinated by how different organizations approach that. Some do it by edict, some do it by sort of a ground up sort of process. So I really just think that's sort of interesting. And this notion of, oftentimes organizations, if they're doing well and they're successful, they sort of get complacent. We've been doing it this way for the last 10 years and it's fine. And, the next thing they know, they're going out of business. So now there's a forcing function, but it's too late. And they suffer those consequences. So anyway, that's what I thought. What did you think, Mike?
Yeah, Bela, I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, this has been kind of a mainstay of my teaching for 25 years, is this idea that disruption happens when managers kind of get too full of self and they have these kind of blinders on. And when somebody has a different idea how to run the business, they're like, oh, our customers don't want that, right? They want it the way that we've always given it to them. We're very successful. And this is really, when you hear a top manager saying something like that, that to me is always a real warning sign, flashing red lights that disruption is ahead. And, think about whether it's coffee, right? Like, people used to buy their coffee in a can in the grocery store, right? Maxwell House and Sanka and Taster's Choice, right? And then really in a very short amount of time, Starbucks took over the industry. Why weren't there coffee shops that were Maxwell House brand, right? They should have come up with this. And when Starbucks said, oh, nobody's going to pay $5 for a cup of coffee, right? Guess what? They did, because they wanted somebody to make the coffee, better coffee, and serve it in a cool place that was neither home nor office, right? And they really, the rest of the story is history. Amazon, right? Who's going to order books online when you can go to a bookstore, right? I mean, Barnes & Noble should have owned the online book space, right? They had the whole infrastructure set up if they wanted to, right? Just these blinders. So, this is the thing. So what Gary was talking about really resonated. And what you said about, I think COVID was spot on, being a forcing function. Here's what I hope, right? I don't know where we're at with COVID and what's going to happen, but I hope that, we can put it in the past at some point, right? If not already, but soon. But I hope that when history looks back and evaluates the COVID era, that, people see, of course, first, the incredibly high human cost of early deaths, hospitalizations, people suffering with long COVID and debilitating symptoms for long periods of time, psychological trauma, the trauma it took on our healthcare system. I mean, right, your kids, your son and daughter-in-law work in an ER, and they've seen it firsthand. And even my local doctor, you know what I mean, right, has really transformed their world in not so good ways. And even people who work at grocery stores and things like this, right, really had all these negative things, but it also had some amazing positive impacts, right, that I hope don't get overlooked because they're lessons, right? It was a golden era of creativity, right? There was massive changes in so many small and large companies that pivoted faster than in any time than in recent human history. They transformed themselves. They pulled together these massive changes with not a lot of resources and lots of pressure, and they reformed themselves, right, on the fly and got people to buy in. They developed new products and services like that, right, on a shoestring budget. It was really remarkable to watch, to see all the devastation, and that's incredibly sad. But at the same time, to see all this transformation was remarkable in the restaurant industry and the delivery space and, healthcare and everything. And I hope that we can take out, especially as teachers, right, to take out some of these lessons, to do exactly what you said, is to use these lessons so that when things hopefully get back to quote unquote normal or a steady state or an equilibrium, we learn from this and don't lose that ability that this generation had once in a lifetime, right, to learn how to pivot. I think our parents had it post World War II, or our grandparents, right, post World War II, right? Yeah. These were these transformational moments, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I hope.
Yeah. Another thing, as you were talking there, that got me thinking about, oftentimes companies do customer surveys. What do our customers want? And, I've sat on a lot of boards in my career, both in the private equity business, venture business, and other times. And one of the things I always say is do a survey of people who are not your customers. What do they want? Because that's where the insight's going to come from. You're not going to get a lot of insight from people who are your customers because they're already using your product. It's the people who are not your customers. What are they looking for? And those are the folks that you don't leave them out of your survey. I'm not saying it's an either or situation. You need to do them both. You need to ask your customers how you can improve your products and services, but you also need to ask people who are not your customers, what does your product not have that if it had it, they might be your customer.
Yeah, and that's hard work. I mean, it's hard enough to get your existing customers to talk to you. It's even harder sometimes to go find your non-customers and get them to talk to you, but critical information there.
Yeah, but in a lot of businesses, particularly where you're selling high ticket items, you're doing proposals, you're doing presentations, and you're competing with 3 other companies for something. And then you got to go in and sort of say, hey, listen, let me buy you dinner, but let's go talk about why we didn't get your business. Mm-hmm. And you can't do that with everybody, but if you can do it with 10 or 15% of the people who are not your customers, that's great data, man. That's great
Either
information.
you're chasing the wrong customers, right? Or you're not offering the right type of product or mix of services. It's almost always, or you can't meet, and if you can't meet the price, right, and make margins, then your processes are off. So it's one of 3 things, right? Wrong customers, wrong product or service, or your margins are messed up.
And all 3 of those data points are valuable.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. But you got to know which one. Those 3 all require different fixes, right? So you have to know which one it is before you can close the gap, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
I also liked how Gary has taken his kind of core skill and what you mentioned in the beginning of the outro, right? That customer experience, right? And figuring out change and motivating people. I thought those were fantastic. He took this core skill and knowledge set and he transferred it across different industries. He was really kind of this chameleon, has a negative impact, or a negative connotation. But I love how the fact that he took his core beliefs and then moved them in different spaces. And he works at a CPA firm and he's not an accountant. I love that, right? How important is this ability to kind of take these, the pay it forward thing and the narrow focus thing and the staffing ideas about drive and energy? These are all great. How important is it to have a set of core beliefs that you can then apply in different settings to allow you that career flexibility given kind of today's economic environment, right? When you grew up, in the early days, you worked for one company, you were a GE person or an IBM person or a Ford Motor Company person, right? And now it's all over the place. Does Gary have something special here, or is it just something that's kind of an interesting thing to see?
What I do know is that skill of being able to transform working in industry A and then take the skills that you learn there and apply them in industry B is much more important, like you said today, than it was 40 years ago. And I think it'll continue to be more and more important. My father-in-law worked for the same company, graduated from college, went to work for a company, and he stayed there his whole career, right? And like you said, that's sort of how things were. And today we know what the average tenure at a company is, like 5 or 7 years or something. It's pretty darn short. And at least here in the United States. So you got to be able to take that. But I think there's 2 pieces to this. There's, for you, the individual employee, being able to, how do I say this? Being willing to take that risk of trying a different environment for you to work in. And I think each time you do that, you learn something. And one of the things you'll learn is what type of environments you like. And I know as I evolved in my career, I got much better at sort of picking and choosing which type of culture my skill set and the things that I like and the things that work for me and give me satisfaction I mesh with, and which ones I don't mesh with. So, but that took a lot of bouncing around and being exposed to various different types of cultures, corporate cultures, and corporate environments.
Because you really were a chameleon too, Bela, in a lot of ways. You have this core set of beliefs that I really admire and appreciate about you, right? Your attention to detail, your focus on principles, your ethics, right? All of these, your ability to tell a good story, right? You have all of these great things, right? And you had 6 careers, I think, if we counted them up.
At least,
right? At least.
Yeah. But I also think that this is important for companies and organizations to recognize this, because I think people like Gary is what give that CPA firm diversity. We always think about diversity around certain metrics, right? Race, sex are the 2 key ones that we talk about a lot, right? But diversity is much broader than that. And I think bringing in people from other organizations, from other sort of backgrounds and experiences and other cultures is really, really important, particularly in today's world, which is a global world, right? Where almost every business, maybe not regional CPA firms, but almost every business sells and markets itself globally these days. So this notion of that diversity, I think, is really, really important. And even in a regional CPA firm, right? If you're in Ohio, the culture in one part of Ohio is different than the culture in another part of Ohio. And your ability to sort of engage with those various different cultures and societal things that happen in diversity that is out there in the world, because many companies are very homogeneous across certain metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And
they hire and reward that way. It's on purpose, right?
Exactly.
They don't say it. It's not explicit, but implicitly it happens because they hire and reward people that look like the top management team, and the whole organization winds up looking that way.
That's right. But the world doesn't, right? The world does not. And I think this goes back a little bit to customers that we were talking about earlier too, right? Look at your customers. Are they real homogeneous
right.
across certain metrics, right? That's going to tell you something. So I just think people like Gary and that skill set and being able to move that skill set from organization to organization is really important these days. It's going to continue to be important. And actually, it's going to increase in importance as time goes on. And it's important both for employees and for employers.
I love it, Bela. So hats off and kudos to the partners of that CPA firm for taking a risk and bringing in somebody like this. And maybe a little lessons learned for this is if you work for some sort of services firm or whatever it is, it might make sense for you to go out and find somebody with a different mindset and a different experience set to help part of your organization. That risk might be worth it, right? To bring in some new, fresh ideas and approaches that can help grow your business or improve your business. Right. I think that's kind of a neat kind of small takeaway from this.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that as you're saying that, it got me thinking about CPA firms, law firms, oftentimes medical practices, private equity funds. They very, very rarely, if ever, have outside board of directors. It's the partners in that business, because most of them are some form of partnership. Those are the ones that manage and run and govern, not just manage and run, but govern the business. And I remember having a conversation with I have a real good friend who's an attorney at one of the big firms here. And he was saying, he goes, because he was very entrepreneurial. His beat was the entrepreneurial companies and sort of the startup. That's where I met him. And he was he always kept saying, we don't have a board of directors in the law firm. Why is that?
And you should.
And we should, because we have no outside, the board of directors is fundamentally the partners who've been here for 30 years.
Right.
And I know we're missing business opportunities. I know we're missing things, culturally, we're missing all sorts of stuff because we don't have diversity in sort of the way we think and approach things. So anyway, that's an interesting thought too. Yeah.
All right. I think we should wrap this up, Bela. What do you think?
Sounds good.
All right, listeners, thanks once again for joining us today. We hope you found this episode as interesting and thought-provoking as we did. And as always, if you have questions about what we discussed or suggestions about guests we should have on the show, feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike @gmail.com.
Hey, and please do hit that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcasting application. And I'll let you know that these podcasts are now available on YouTube. So you can actually see Mike's and my talking head on the YouTube if you'd rather listen to them on YouTube. Just search for The Unconventional Path and you'll find it. So until...
But wait, Bela, if people don't want to do that, it's okay if they stick with the audio only. Our faces are made for radio, as they've said.
That's
but
right.
I like the effort, and who knows, it might be more entertaining. I have no idea. My mom is happy. I know that. You know, she can see that I'm eating well. You know.
Well, it opens up another access channel for people who want to listen to this, if that works better for them. Yeah, I'm certainly not promoting it from the perspective of they can see our smiling faces.
We're not beautiful people. You know, let's be honest.
No, we're not. So hey, until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you soon, Mike.
Thanks, Bela. Talk with you and everybody else soon.